Here, read this.
Woof.
Well, it's officially summer, and I thought today I would talk to you a little bit about summer blockbusters. Went to see my first film of the summer yesterday, Elvis, starring Vic Reeves and Vladimir Nabokov. Huge fan of both those two. Huge fan of Elvis as well. But unfortunately, the film sucked. So I thought I'd make up for it by talking about some bygone classic blockbusters. Blockbuster horror, to be precise. In all 5 cases of the books I'm going to talk about, I'd seen the film, but had never actually read the book. So without further ado, the first one I started off with was Psycho, written in 1959 by Robert Bloch. This was adapted by Hitchcock into the film Psycho, I think the following year. This is the story of Norman Bates, a lonely motel keeper living with his ailing and malevolent mother, who is nothing but trouble. She brings unwanted attention onto Norman and his motel after she murders one of his guests. I'm going to assume you've seen the film Psycho. The plot of the novel is very similar, but there are differences. The first difference you notice is Norman. In the film, he is, of course, played by Anthony Perkins, tall, gangly, awkward, dark-haired, kind of teenage-looking, even though he's, I think he's 40 in the novel. I can't remember kind of what age Anthony Perkins was. The first difference here is that Norman is plump, bespectacled, balding, and blonde. The second difference really is tone. Obviously, Psycho was very shocking on release, but Hitchcock famously worked out how to tone down gore and nudity. Well, no effort was made by Robert Bloch to do that. The shower scene ends with Mother cutting the head off her victim. Right from the start, Norman is reading a book about Incan sacrifice and people being turned into sort of skin drums. The Oedipal stuff is ramped up to 11 in a kind of weird mix of attempted psychological realism and carry on. So Norman is constantly slapping his own wrist at perving on Mother. Mother's thighs were dirty. Mustn't look. He never thought about Mother's breasts. He mustn't. As he does in the film, he pervs on Marion Crane. I can't actually remember if that's what she's called in the novel, but she behaves as only women in novels written by men do, in that they take off all their clothes and inspect themselves in a full-length mirror with an aggressive scrutiny. She unhooked her bra, swung it in an arc, and let it sail. Now the panties. For a moment she stood before the mirror, set in the door, and took stock of herself. Now the panties might be my favourite line. When we get to the actual murder, again, Hitchcock could kind of fudge how Norman looked dressed up as his mother. Here we get a full description, and it was another of my favourite bits. He's pulled back the shower curtain, and this is what Marion Crane sees in her last moments. A headscarf concealed the hair, and the glassy eyes stared inhumanly. But it wasn't a mask. It couldn't be. The skin had been powdered dead white, and 2 hectic spots of rouge centred on the cheekbones. It wasn't a mask. It was the face of a crazy old woman. And part of me wondered, given that this Norman Bates is fat, how he managed to get gaunt cheekbones. It was a good decision of Hitchcock's, or whoever it was, to cast a reedy, gaunt-looking, skinny Norman Bates. The idea of a fat, middle-aged man suddenly turning into a bony old woman is a little bit hard to get your head around. But, you know, with the twist in mind, I've got to say credit to Bloch. The idea of talentlessly applied rouge, hectically applied rouge to the cheekbones is quite funny when you know how the twist is, because it doesn't sound so much like, a mad woman in mad makeup, a crazy old woman, as he says, but rather a middle-aged man who doesn't really know how to do it, but he's trying to kind of guess. In terms of what the book gives us that the movie doesn't, the film, in regards to the twist, sort of lets us draw our own conclusions a bit, whereas here, Norman tells us what is happening. He tells us that it must have been Mother, and he's drinking and having panic attacks about his mad, violent mother. There's one bit where she's committed the murder and then disappeared, and he wonders where she's gone. We'll come to that in a sec. But he bursts into her room, looks around and says, nothing had changed in Mother's room. Nothing ever changed, but Mother was gone. Which is quite funny, knowing that she's been dead for years. Other parts are quite hard to believe, even with a main character who is insane. When he's wondering where Mother has gone, he says, "Where? Was she out on the highway, ready to be picked up by anyone who might be driving by?" Like, where in Norman's delusion does he imagine she is hitching a lift to? And yeah, just as there are good and bad elements of Norman being not our narrator, but our main character, similarly, there's some really terrible writing and some that's quite good. There was nothing in his stomach but the dryness of fear, just as the wetness of fear soaked his outer skin. Fear is dry on the inside and wet on the outside. But then there's some really good stuff as well. Some of the things Norman comes up with in his delusions are really, really funny. So in the wake of the murder again, there's a kind of frosty silence, in inverted commas, between him and his mum, which is obviously him and one of his fractured selves. And he says something along the lines of, "It was quite embarrassing that I was doing all the cleaning up after Mother's crimes. She mainly just stayed in her room and probably her conscience bothered her." And there's some nice kind of nasty little touches. The sheriff of the town, we see a tiny little snippet of him and his wife, and we see that he calls her Ma. And we don't dwell on it at all, but just in the context of this Oedipal relationship that Norman has with his mother, it's kind of a nice touch. It begins in bad taste and it ends in bad taste. They kind of wrap things up and explain Bates's insanity by saying, "We think for years he's been a secret transvestite." I can't remember who says it, but we have this weird description of his different personalities. There was Norman, the boy who was in love with his mother. There was Norma, his mother, whose identity he took on after he killed her. And then there was the mild-mannered motel keeper, Normal. So yeah, trashy, puerile, and a strong recommend.
I'm not even going to swat that fly. I hope they are watching. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know, and they'll say, "Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly."
Moving on then, Jaws by Peter Benchley. This came out in 1974. The following year, it was directed by young Steven Spielberg into a smash hit summer blockbuster. So Jaws is the story of a rogue great white shark that is terrorizing the summer resort town of Amity. Plot-wise, pretty similar to the film, but there's just more. As Benchley says in his introduction, there's a romance subplot and a mafia subplot. I find it hard to believe that, knowing what romance subplot he was talking about, he still thought it was worth building up. But let's start with the characters. So we have Police Chief Brody. Here he is... Well, I've got to start by saying this is a ridiculously pervy book. Our introduction to our hero, Brody, is him dreaming about groping a high schooler. That's our first taste of Brody. He drinks, he berates his wife, he is incredibly insecure. She throws a party and he gets blind drunk because he thinks they're putting on airs. In a weird reference, he says at one point, who's coming for dinner? Jackie Onassis and Prince Philip? Did not expect Prince Philip to get a reference in Jaws, but yeah, he's basically an 8-year-old boy in the body of a 41-year-old man. And he's not even the worst one. Then there's Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss in the film. He's kind of young, which I guess Richard Dreyfuss is. Still a marine biologist, all of that. But this Hooper is a stud. And then there's Quint, who is the Hemingway-esque fisherman, who they recruit in the sort of second half of the novel to come and help them catch this shark, or this fish. They always call it the fish in the book. He's probably the closest to his screen version, but he doesn't have his famous backstory about the shark attack on the Indianapolis and all of that. I think there might be a hint that he's a veteran, but we don't get that detail. Finally, we come to Ellen, Brody's wife, who has a much larger role here. Probably the most memorable role in the book, for all the wrong reasons. Starts off promising. She is a summer visitor in her youth. She got together with this cop. She settled down there. And now she feels like she's not really accepted by the locals, but she can't really rejoin the fun life she had when she was a summer tourist. Brody, as I've described, is absolutely intolerable. So she quite rapidly decides to have an affair with Hooper. So by the way, there is a shark in this book. We'll get to that. But whilst they're out hunting this shark that's been killing people, Ellen is masterminding a shag, really, with Hooper. Brody and Hooper are working together, and Brody already deeply resents Hooper for his youth and looks and the fact that he knows about this shark and clearly knows a lot more than Brody does. So Ellen sort of calls Hooper up and tells him to go to a pub to meet her. And if you thought the kind of male gaze stuff of Psycho was bad, just you wait. So she's kind of getting ready. We have exactly the same female character on their own, taking all their clothes off, again in a full-length mirror, examining herself, admiring the contours of her breasts. Her ankles were delicate, and her feet, with the toenails neatly pruned, were perfect enough to suit any pedophile. First sign of trouble there. I'm pretty sure he means podophile. I'm not sure if that's just a typo in the Kindle edition I read. But even if he did spell it right, I would just use a different word. So she's getting all dressed up. Ellen wished she had some of that feminine hygiene deodorant. You know, that sort of smelly stuff. Bottles of Lady Whiff. That sort of thing. Smellies. So all she had instead was cologne, which she put behind her ears, inside her elbows, behind her knees, on her nipples, and on her genitals. Women are mysterious, aren't they? Like, I would never have any idea that they dunk their nipples in cologne before going out to socialise. She goes out to meet, and by the way, there is a shark in this book. She goes out to meet Hooper, and he says immediately, "Wow, you smell great behind your ears, inside your elbows, behind your knees, on your nipples, and on your genitals. What happened to the rest of you? Did you run out of lady whiff?" Rapidly, they start talking about what their deepest sexual fantasies are. And Ellen, who has given us the impression that she's very nervous about this, that she's never done this type of thing before, says, on the first time of asking, so what do you fantasize about? "Oh, you know, rape, I guess." To which Hooper responds, "Mine are usually orgies, or at least threesies." Ellen bursts out laughing at the idea of how tight a chicken's vagina would be because they're eating chicken. And because he's a biologist, she asks him, how tight would a chicken be? Then they drive off to go and shag. And at the thought of distracting Hooper so they crash, she bursts into giggles, imagining Hooper dead with an erection and herself, dress bunched up around her waist and her vagina yawning open, glistening wet for the world to see. I mean, it's just demented. As soon as I got to that bit, I looked up kind of reviews of Jaws because I knew that would be what people were talking about, and bang, the first one I saw was saying something like, "There is a sex scene and I wish I was filming myself when I read it because I've never pulled more faces." And that's exactly what I was thinking at the time. The affair, by the way, doesn't really go anywhere because Hooper dies. He gets munched up by the shark, unlike in the film. He gets eaten up by the shark, and then Brody, trying to shoot the shark, accidentally shoots the half-eaten Hooper in the neck. So he sort of gets his revenge, but he doesn't actually know for sure. He sort of suspects Hooper and Ellen, but he doesn't really know. The reason Hooper gets eaten is because he insists in going into the cage like he does in the film. The shark comes gliding past him. It goes, "He let his fingertips caress the flesh, past the pectoral fins, the pelvic fins, the thick, firm genital claspers, until they were slapped away by the sweeping tail." At that point, I was genuinely scared for the shark, that the shark would be roped into some kind of non-consensual threesy. And even Quint is a bit weird. Like they're shooting at the shark or trying to harpoon the shark, and again the shark kind of like, I guess he banks, and they see his underside, and Quint immediately shouts, "I see your cock, you bastard! Attack me, will you, you uppity fuck?" I mean, who calls a shark an uppity fuck? But moving away from all of the perverted madness, the romance stuff, as Benchley teases you in his introduction, what works about the novel and what is kind of hinted at in the film is the idea of these two existential threats to the town. Open the beaches and people are going to get eaten by sharks. Close the beaches and the financial hit from losing the summer tourist business will effectively put the town on its knees. Like, the economic ramifications of that are something that the town can't withstand. That side of things is a bit darker than it is in the film. Like, Brody and the newspaper editor have kind of colluded in covering up crimes in order to not lose the summer business. So there's this big discussion when the first body washes up. Do we tell people or not? Sharks usually, attack one person and then move off. Probably it'll just move off. Let's not report it. The mayor has ties to the mafia because his wife was ill and he borrowed lots of money. And now members of the 5 families in New York are kind of putting the squeeze on him. And so he's really keen to just get those beaches open no matter what. So yeah, there's this idea that Amity is being punished for its greed, for its corruption. Benchley mentions in his introduction that Fidel Castro thought that the Jaws, the novel, was a great metaphor for the corrupting influence of capitalism. And you can sort of see why. There's one bit that's quite on the nose where Benchley says something like, Amity had a kind of parasitic relationship with its tourists. It sort of devoured ferociously the host animal, being the tourists, and ripped them to shreds, giving you the idea that they're now getting their just desserts in the form of the shark. So yeah, I suppose the only other significant difference would be the ending. Here, Hooper gets munched, Quint gets munched, and the shark survives. We end with Brody alone at sea, swimming back for shore, his fate uncertain. So there you have it, there's Jaws. I mean, it's a really weird one because the bad bits are outrageously bad. I'm tempted to say entertainingly bad. And the good bits are actually quite good. I really like the double threat stuff. And the other thing I wanted to mention that Peter Benchley does that I quite like is, as well as our core group of characters, at the end of each chapter, we have little snippets of different townspeople, random people that we never see again. We just get a tiny little bite of how the rest of the town is reacting to what's going on. So there's like a father telling his kids a story about sharks, a conversation in the pub about the investigation, that kind of thing. A really weird book. Not unenjoyable, but awful. So kind of similar to Psycho, really. Next one, let's stick with Spielberg. Jurassic Park from 1990. This is by Michael Crichton. This is the story of a soon-to-be opened amusement park, the first to feature as its main attraction genetically reanimated dinosaurs. This was kind of the disappointment of the list, to be honest. It could have been a sort of H.G. Wellsian cautionary tale about genetic research being commodified, and instead of it being in the hands of scientists, it's in the hands of people like Walt Disney, and it's just being turned into amusement parks. There's a stab of that, but it doesn't really land. Not much of it lands, to be honest. It's a dull book. There isn't much kind of schlocky fun that you would imagine. The stupid bits are seriously stupid. It puts on a lot of airs, like quotes from Linnaeus and lots of running waffle about chaos theory come off like a framed IQ test in the kitchen of a known idiot. It feels rather strange to anyone familiar with the film. The events of the film feel like they get going about a third of the way into the book. There's quite a lot of preamble. You get a sort of much larger cast view of the Jurassic Park project. So there's scenes with John Hammond getting funding from the Japanese, for example. Yeah, really weird side note with that is that he takes in order to impress investors and prove that he knows what he's doing when it comes to genetic meddling, he brings a pint-sized elephant with him that someone has cooked up from him in the lab. A miniature elephant that we hear was rodent-like, quick-moving and mean-tempered. Kind of like to have seen more of that elephant, and it could have stolen the show. It was kind of the weirdest creature in a novel about reanimated dinosaurs. The writing in the book is awful. On the wall, Grant saw a grey metal box and a stenciled sign, Sauropod Maintenance Building. This must be the sauropod paddock, he thinks. Thank God you were here, Dr. Grant. Yet John Hammond is not as kind of twinkly as he is in Jurassic Park. And I think one of the things that works about the film is that you kind of want to see Hammond's experiment work. He's a good salesman, isn't he? Whereas here he's described as being just a fairly boring monopolist. And Crichton kills him off, unlike Spielberg. He gets eaten by compies at the end. The kids are awful. I think their ages are swapped around. So it's the boy who's the older one, and he has a younger sister, as opposed to the other way around in the film. The younger sister says at one point to her brother, they're alone, they're being chased by velociraptors. Ick. I was standing on someone's ear. That is really disgusting. Never mind. The dinosaurs are kind of disappointing as well, and Crichton makes some real howlers in presentation of particularly the T-Rex. Listen to this and tell me if it undermines how scary you would find a T-Rex. At one point, the characters come across the T-Rex that's been chasing them, sitting upright, its hind legs stretched out in front. After snorting, yawning, and giving a comedy belch, it, quote, scratched behind its ear with its hind foot, just like a dog. Then Crichton commits dinosaur heresy. The T-Rex raises a forelimb to swipe at the flies buzzing around its snout. Well, I don't think I need to explain to you why that is unacceptable dino writing. A couple of other little touches that were unexpected. There's a series of Alice in Wonderland references, which I thought was quite odd. There's a geneticist called Lewis Dodgson, which has to be Lewis Carroll reference, given that his real name was Dodgson. I think Ian Malcolm is called Mad as a Hatter, and then there is a computer program that Nedry, the villain, the fat guy, has a computer program called White Rabbit. Oh, they have a gimmick, and I can't remember if this is in the film at all. They have a gimmick that is supposed to be a failsafe for if the dinosaurs escaped the island. They're hooked on lysine. They have a lysine dependency that they won't get elsewhere in the world. So if they escape from the island that Jurassic Park is on, they'll just perish. Oh, and auto poop. That was another touch I rather liked. Auto poop, automated fecal analysis called auto poop, which checks for parasites in the dinosaurs' leavings. Why on earth Spielberg left auto poop out of the film, I can't imagine. There's a riff on on the dinosaurs having frog DNA, which I think was used in the later remake films, camouflaging and changing gender, that kind of thing. I think the velociraptors can do that. I suppose the most interesting part of it is Henry Wu, the guy who kind of makes the dinosaurs for John Hammond. There's some quite goofy descriptions of him, like wielding DNA like a sculptor wields clay, and he's kind of a third-rate Frankenstein sort of figure. I wish they made more of an argument between Wu and Hammond, where Wu is saying, look, these dinosaurs are really quite rowdy. I control their DNA. I could make them sort of not as fast and just not as fatal to human life. And Hammond is like, no, it's accurate. We want everyone to come and see real dinosaurs. To which Wu says, but they're not real dinosaurs. They're kind of half frog and half confected. That was quite interesting, and it led to a good bit, probably my favourite bit of the book, which was just about recreating dinosaurs. I think this is Wu he's talking about. And the limits of his science had left him with a mysterious feeling about the dinosaurs in the park. He was never really sure at all, whether the behaviour of the animals was historically accurate or not. Were they behaving as they really had in the past? That I thought was good, because it lined the science against the art there. You know, the scientist recreating dinosaurs from their DNA, and the writer writing dinosaurs and, getting quite a lot wrong. T-Rex couldn't scratch its nose with its forelimb. Crichton probably knew there was no way that he was going to get things right at the rates that things are found out about dinosaurs. It wasn't that long ago that people thought that a T-Rex stood sort of vertically with its tail kind of dragging along the ground and this awkward sort of pinched neck type posture, instead of balanced out with its tail horizontally in line with its neck. Yeah, a bit of a downer, that one, to be honest. There's something quite unlikable about it. I couldn't really quite put my finger on it, but for such a beloved film, it seemed slim pickings for enjoyment.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Moving on, we go to Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, which came out in 1988. This is the story of a young FBI agent who must interview a notorious incarcerated cannibal in order to shed some light on the behaviour and whereabouts of a new active serial killer. Silence of the Lambs is a sequel, and I actually read two Thomas Harris novels. I read Red Dragon, the first one, and then Silence of the Lambs. Silence of the Lambs is a great improvement, in my opinion, on Red Dragon. Red Dragon also has Hannibal Lecter locked up, but the main detective is Will Graham, a sort of mopey wonder boy. I mean, he's like 40 years old, but he is treated like a kind of prodigal child serial killer hunter. He's all cross because before he was put behind bars, Hannibal Lecter sliced up his guts, and now he drinks and is sort of convinced to take one last job by Jack Crawford. It's not bad until you find out about the killer, basically, and Harris goes on a multi-chapter exploration of his background, and he is given the serial killer cliche 101 array of abusive childhood, got bullied, weird semi-incestuous relationship with older female relatives, the works. So Silence of the Lambs is a marked improvement. There's no Will Graham. Instead, we have Clarice Starling, probably the biggest improvement. She is young, dedicated, resilient FBI in training, I think. I think she's a student. She's not supernaturally gifted. She's just good. It's a weird series, really, because it kind of takes its name from Hannibal Lecter, he's in Silence of the Lambs a bit more, but he's barely in Red Dragon. I mean, famously, Anthony Hopkins, I think he won did he win a Best Actor Oscar for the smallest amount of time on screen in Silence of the Lambs? I've always been a kind of Hannibal hipster in that I think Manhunter is the best film with Brian Cox. I actually prefer the Lecter of the books to Hopkins. It's not as camp and not as cartoony. And I like the fact that Lecter is incredibly famous, almost like legendary. There's a reference to, the press love Lecter even better than Prince Andrew, which is a reference that has aged beautifully. I can't believe in a video about horror blockbusters, we've had a reference to Prince Philip and Prince Andrew. Little differences. Lecter has 6 fingers. I can't remember if that's true of the film or not. It's been ages since I've seen Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, he has polydactyly, 6 fingers on one hand. There's also a bunch of Alice in Wonderland references in this book as well. There's obviously caterpillars, because Buffalo Bill plants chrysalises in his victims' throats. He's one of those helpful serial killers who decide to come up with a cute little visual depiction of his motives. As well as caterpillars, we have a weird Tweedledum and Dee pair of figures turn up, who are the moth experts that Clarice Starling goes to see. They're playing chess. The villain is an improvement on the Red Dragon that, as I said, is kind of ridiculous. Although it's a bit of a psycho throwback. Buffalo Bill looks like he's about to be evil transvestite revisited, obsessed with his mother, who was a Miss America competitor, something like that, and he watches tapes about her and tries to find women who are as big as him, starve them in order to skin them, and so he can wear their skin. He's tried to alter his appearance to be a bit more female. I think the first time we see him, he's kind of crossing his legs and just shoving his junk in between them and to try and look more feminine. But as Thomas Harris writes, he did not look like a woman. He looked like a man inclined to fight with his nails as well as his fists and feet. After Psycho, I was thinking a little bit like, here we go again. But actually, there is a kind of effort, a 1988 type effort to take a moderate view on transvestism and indeed transsexuality, which is what Buffalo Bill is suspected of. At a time when there were only 3 major centres for sex reassignment surgery in America, Crawford, I think, goes to visit one of them and gets angrily told by the chief medical officer there that there is no correlation between transsexualism and violence, you dinosaur, and da-da-da-da. They also say towards the end, no, he actually wasn't transsexual anyway. He had something else wrong with him, something undefined that won't get us into trouble. But yeah, it's all right. Again, the plot is very, very similar. The film, as I said, kind of hams up a lot of things. So yeah, maybe it's the only one on the list that I would say I think is maybe better than the film.
Morning.
Okay, and last up, we have The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, which came out in 1971. This is the story of a film actress whose daughter begins exhibiting symptoms of demonic possession. And this is the first one that I think has a really distinct literary style. In none of the other ones are there sentences like the brief doomed flare of exploding suns that registers dimly on blind men's eyes, the beginning of the horror passed almost unnoticed. There's also not so good stuff like the child was slender as a fleeting hope. I think the strongest bits of the novel are probably in the build-up, where things aren't quite certain. Reagan is exhibiting symptoms, but they're very unsettling, but no one really knows for sure what's going on. There's really nice moments in that period where Chris, the film actress, Reagan's mother, has left her party guests downstairs having a nice time to go and check on Reagan. And the room is icy cold. She's got goose pimples. She's very apprehensive and not really sure what's going on with her. But she tucks her in and then very gladly tiptoes out of the room back to the warmth and safety of her guests. I thought that was a very nice reversal on the typical child alone in their bedroom, scared by some monster, real or imagined, and desperate to want to go and join the jovial sounds of adult safety below. And I suppose the central character dynamic of the book is atheist Chris, the film star, who is completely convinced that her daughter is possessed, but needs to persuade a priest who's having a crisis of faith that it's not some kind of physiological problem. And the priest really takes some persuading. I mean, he is determined that it's some kind of medical issue. I mean, he's bordering on trying to explain away rattling beds and drawers flying around the room and heads turning back to front. Yeah, I enjoyed this one. I don't think it's as good as the film, but it is enjoyable, and it's a good reminder of what kind of a wacky cast of characters The Exorcist has, in a Hollywood actress, a faithless priest, an ancient demon, and a memorably bumbling, winsome detective as well. Just to pull together the whole theme of bad taste that has been running through most of these books, to be honest. Chris at one point comments on the bad taste of her secretary, who has been reading scripts for her. She says that the secretary says that that a certain script is good, and Chris responds, "Well, you thought Psycho needed a laugh track."
Of our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Damien!
Amen.
So there we have it, 5 blockbuster horror books. Mostly puerile, mostly fun. Don't bother with Jurassic Park. I think that's as good a summary as I can offer. I was planning to talk about more books, but the list just kept growing. So, like I said at the start, I think I'll try and divide it into genre. Maybe do mob books next. Let me know if there's a certain genre you'd prefer, or if you'd be excited for mob stuff. I was thinking mob or non-fiction. But anyway, that is everything for today. I hope you have a great first summer movie experience, whatever it is. And until next time, happy reading.